Shalom, and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me now, this beautiful Parsha, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter, Long Island, and Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky of Anshe Chesed. This week, Anshe Chesed, not Anshe Emet. It's great to see you guys. We have an amazing double Parsha, two portions this week, Behar and Behokotai. Let's get right into it. Behar, what is going on here? I need some Torah here. I need some Torah. Vayedaber Hashem Moshe Behar Sinai Lemor, and then God is speaking at Mount Sinai, and all of a sudden we get 6 years you can plant. The 7th year, it's shmita. What is going on? Or how does Rashi say this, Rabbi Barry Chesler?
So Rashi's famous question is, Ma INYAN SHMITTA ETZEL Har Sinai. What is it with shmita, the sabbatical year, that it has to be mentioned in connection with Mount Sinai? And he said, was it the whole Torah given at Mount Sinai? But just as the shmita here is given with all of its details, Rashi gets in a plug for Torah Sheba'al Peh. All the Torah was given with all its details at Mount Sinai. And for our purposes, as I mentioned before we were recording, I heard Debbie Wiseman, a famous Jewish educator in Jerusalem, tell the following story. When she was new to Israel, she was watching Kojak, which dates everyone who remembers it, with Telly Savalas. And Telly Savalas says, what does this have to do with the price of tea in China? And the Hebrew subtitles are Ma INYAN SHMITTA ETZEL Har Sinai. And in the modern Hebrew idiom, that becomes an equivalent saying. So you could go through life in Israel, not knowing any Rashi, but knowing how to say, what does this have to do with the price of tea in China in biblical or in rabbinic Hebrew? But what I want to point out here, I think that is of value, is that we have these idioms in both languages that travel far beyond their original meaning. Debbie Wiseman recounted that she went to find out what was the story behind the tea in China, and that tea in China was very cheap. It was being sold very dearly in Britain, and people would go in to buy tea and get angry at the merchant for selling tea at such an exorbitant price. We've heard how Rashi connects the details of our Parsha, the sabbatical year, the first several verses, with the entire revelation at Mount Sinai. And it gives us pause for thought, because 3 times in the Parsha we're connected back with Mount Sinai. And there is this recurrent trope where the Torah has to connect things to Mount Sinai, even though it's apparent as we read week by week, lots of things were happening at after Mount Sinai. And there were, as we mentioned a week or two ago, there were even things that they didn't know what to do after the revelation at Mount Sinai.
You know, first of all, I love the little, homespun story about Hebrew idioms, and it's one of the things that, as an American Jew, even one who's pretty reasonably literate in the rabbis and the Bible, we're always just going to there's always going to be a lift to have to turn our thinking into Hebrew, and Israelis, even like as you said, even if they may know no Rashi, no Midrash, there are certain things that just trip off the tongue, just like, there are certain Shakespeare things that trip off our tongues, or British or American literature things that just trip off our tongue because of the ambient atmosphere. But in addition, we were talking also before we started recording about how Leviticus, which is not a book with a great many narratives in it. It's a book mostly of rules and specific behaviors and customs, but there is often a story implicit, or there is often a contextual that goes along with this. So we are reminded here at the end of the book of Leviticus that they haven't left Sinai. They haven't left. They are still at the mountain, and so there has been an extensive period of building this tabernacle, of dedicating this tabernacle, of learning this new religion. And they are about to, what's the first thing that's going to happen in Bamidbar? They're going to learn how to dismantle and reassemble the tabernacle as they go. So they're getting ready in Bamidbar to do a lot more traveling but there's just this implicit, like we know that they have been stationary for, you know, a good long time, listening and learning.
And so there's a story behind this, the rules of the shmita rules and the sabbatical year and the jubilee year, and you know, often when reading this parsha, I'm thinking like, what does the average Joe Israelite, you know, Hebrew, having emerged from slavery? Okay, so they've had a few, you know, setbacks, the golden calf, a couple other things, food, manna, etc. And now they're sitting at the mountain and they're like looking at their watch, you know, saying like, when are we gonna get into the land? And out comes, you know, this legislation. It's, I want to say it's complicated legislation. I mean, it's complicated for people like us to read it. You know, we're far removed from an agrarian society, agrarian culture. I suppose for people who understood what it meant to plant and grow crops, that they were just that much more connected to the rhythms. But this is not easy stuff, and it's like, you know, Ma'inyan Shmita, what are you telling us here? I always feel reading that Rashi, it's there's something more than just you know, the sense that this is legislation here. It's we don't know what you're talking about, and I find, you know, this is for me a homiletical springboard to, you know, what's the relevance of things that, what's the relevance of Shabbat? What's the relevance of Kashrut? What's the relevance of Brit Milah? What's the relevance of the holidays? You know, Ma'inyan Shmita ETZEL Har Sinai is for me the larger categorical question of, you know, how do you explain the whole system to people?
Well,
and it's complicated. Go ahead.
it's important to remember here that there is a call for the land to rest, just like the people have to rest. There's almost a personification of the land, that we treat the land as we treat human beings. And listening to you describe this, Elliot, I was struck by the idea that now that our ancestors are out of Egypt and they're ready to start farming, that's the story that we tell. One of the first things they have to be told is that you're not going to farm forever, that you have to rest also, that part of the cycle of life is rest. It's not something that's given to you by other human beings. It's given to you by God. It is part of how we see, how we find our place in the universe is by resting as well as working.
So I think you are onto something. I think that's the central theme here, the theme of ownership, tenancy, residency. What constitutes habitation in land? Jeremy, you want to jump in?
I think this is absolutely correct, and I think there's multiple ways in which this is manifest. But one of them is, you know, I appreciate very much in our religion the combination of a respect for private property, prohibitions against stealing, the requirement to respect other people's property rights, because I think that's part of ethical treatment of others, and the commitment that you do not get to use your property for absolute maximum profit, no matter what. Nobody can stop you. It's yours. We have this way of talking in the United States that that you know, who are you to tell me what to do with my property? Whatever the market will allow. If I choose to work extra hard, I should be able to work as hard as I want, or I should be able to make as much money as I want. One of the ways in which the Torah it teaches a social ethic is to say, it's your field, but not 7 straight years. You have to stop. It's your field. You can't reap to the edges, though. The edges belong to some of the poor. And to me, this is a profound, like, just as Shabbat says, for 6 days you work hard, you improve, you grow, you achieve. One day you have to rest to keep the balance. This is saying, I think, something profound and similar, that you should work, you should achieve, you are powerful, you will succeed, but only in the context of an ethic that is larger, that includes stopping.
So let's go into one of the specific rules here, and this has to do with the Jubilee. After 7 sets of 7 years, you're in year 49, and then year 50 is the Yovel. So that really constitutes 2 years of sabbatical. Okay, you know, many of us will enjoy at some point in our careers a quote unquote sabbatical. It's not a year off, right? When's your sabbatical, Jeremy?
2. No, that's 2. I get the 49th and the 50th. No, I will have a sabbatical this year, although it's already been delayed for another reason, then for COVID, and then my dear colleague Yael Hammerman and her husband, our other colleague Josh Rabin, are expecting another baby. So she's going to have a maternity leave, so I'm getting delayed a little bit again. But around February, I should get a sabbatical.
Well, I used the summer as a sabbatical. I had it over 6 years, over 2 months. That was pretty good. 1 month, no, actually 6 months. Anyway, the point is, yeah. So sabbatical, the idea of sabbatical is built in here, but the complication is, so year 48 comes and you're worried. You're Joe Hebrew Israelite. You're planting your thing. You reap, bountiful harvest. Year 48, you're looking at yourself and you come home to your little shack and you say, I don't know what we're going to do next year. Year 49 is coming. It's shmita, and then Yovel's coming. That's the Jubilee coming. I don't know. What are we going to do, honey? What are we going to do? So the Torah says, it says it in a much more formal way. Ma nochal b'shana hashvi'it. What are we going to eat in the 7th year? Hey, lo nizra. We haven't planted anything. We haven't harvested anything. And so the Torah says, "V'tziviti et berchati lachem." I'm going to command my blessing to you. On the 6th year, it's going to have great harvest. L'shlosh shanim. So this is where I kind of stop. If I had a glass of wine, I'd say, okay, we're going for it here. I mean, you seriously? We're going to rely on a miracle for 3 years? How do you read this? Jeremy, you want to give it a shot? Or Barry, you want to? Go ahead. Barry.
All right. So there are 2 things that are important here. The first, I think, is that in the sabbatical year, you're essentially told you have to live like a poor person. You're dependent on other people or on the land to provide for you. You're not going to provide for yourself. And I think this is an important statement about how we see ourselves in the world, that we cannot lord it over other people, act like the Lord. We have to remember what our place is. The other thing is, again, the way you describe it, I think this is a great Zionist dream. The great challenge of Zionism was that everything had to be translated into Jews taking ownership of their lives. So in the Galut, we had the Shabbat Goy, the Goy who would do the things that Jews were forbidden to do on Shabbat and Yom Tov. In Israel, the Jews have to do those things. Now, we still have non-Jews who do some of those things, but part of the Zionist enterprise was figuring out what we were going to allow Jews to do, because a modern society requires things to happen. Yeah. And I think that the element of God providing is this element of bitachon, that no matter where we are, but especially in the land of Israel, we have to have this trust that things will work out.
Jeremy.
Yeah, well, obviously, the laws are rules and the laws are behaviors and the laws are parables. And this is a parable of bitachon, of trust in God. And it is a parable of rest and taking on this voluntary, somewhat poverty. And it is incredibly difficult to envision how these things could actually happen. Because how many people could possibly have lived on the land in biblical Israel? Not many. Barry has sometimes referred about the difference between the competitive shepherding cultures and the agricultural farming cultures, and conceivably maybe this is shmita is a tilt towards the shepherding cultures, because because you can't have the produce of the land, but and then the rabbis come along and ruled that you can't eat sfichim, the stuff that just grows of itself. So it's impossible to see. I find it impossible to see what an ancient society actually did. Certainly a modern society, it can't work in this way. And as you pointed out, Barry, we have the Zionist challenges. So you have Rav Kook, who he didn't innovate this, but he certainly upheld it. And in the last Shemitah year, Rav Ovadia Yosef also affirmed, yes, you can sell the land to non-Jews, technically, like you sell your chametz, and the non-Jews can work the land and they can sell you the produce, or they can also, there's a warehouse of the Beit Din, the Otsar of the Beit Din, that they can turn it over to some Jewish communal institution who can then sell it. And that strikes some people as kind of ugly, because that doesn't seem very Zionistic to sell the land. But the other alternative is just import all the food, which also doesn't sound very Zionistic.
Which is what they do anyway. No, I want to just react to it only in the sense that I read this text and think, well, would you, if you were in a difficult medical situation and your person of interest said to you, no, it's okay, v'tziviti et birchati, God is going to command his blessing upon you, you'd say, thank you. But I think I'd also like to try out, the advances of medicine. In other words, yeah, we do rely on God's blessing, but we also rely on ourselves. And I see in here, my reading of this is like, this is a moment of tension. Anytime there's a question, anytime the Torah has a question, like, for example, the children of the Haggadah, they're all in the Torah, they're asking because there's a source of conflict and a source of tension. And the source of conflict and tension here is very real. It's like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And so what are we going to do has two answers. Hashem will provide, or you know what? I'm going to work very, very hard to make sure that this harvest in the 6th year is bountiful, and that we'll plan appropriately. We'll create our chavurot or our kibbutz or whatever our social needs require. We'll store our food together. We'll share our food together, and that way we'll be able to endure what we hope will be a bountiful harvest. And of course, if the bountiful harvest doesn't come on the 6th year, we're all in it together.
So Jeremy says something important about it's hard to imagine how this actually worked. I once tried to write a paper on it, and even for modern scholars, although the book I was looking at was from the 50s, it is very difficult to figure out how this might have worked. So there is a piece of the Yovel, though, that I think we can all understand. And that is that the people had to go back to their ancestral land, that no matter how alienated you were from the land, every 50 years you went back. And the slave who had his ear pierced as a sign of perpetual servitude went free as well. Yeah. So the sabbatical year, we're looking forward. We go, and the first year is a new year. It's not really going back, but the Jubilee year is a way of having a grand cycle. Things are going to go, there's a restoration. We're going to go back to the way things were, because we should never be so far of where we began that we think that we're done with it.
So it's a grand reset. It totally reboots and resets the economy, which of course, in our context with such a complicated economy, supply chains, and I go to the grocery store and you can buy, I don't know, mangoes from Honduras, now. I mean, I didn't grow up with mangoes. You didn't grow up with kiwi,
Well, you grew up in Canada.
I know.
Was Canada a country back then?
Oranges. We had oranges, but it's all imported. No, of course. But that's the miracle of a global economy. Of course, it has its downside. And so maybe this is maybe not so far-fetched. There is an economic theme here, the economic story, and poverty.
This is really rich because, as Barry said, I think this is a parable of the fresh start. You never are so lost that you can't come home. You can always resume, and it's predicated, also in ways which are, kind of fantastical and impractical, but is predicated on the idea that everybody, with the chalukah that Moses and Joshua did of the land, everybody got a fair shake, right? And the population hasn't grown from a few thousand to many millions, because it wouldn't really work now. But the idea is that everybody had at one point an equitable share, and everybody's going to get it back and restart. And everybody is tied to the land. This is one of the ways in which the Torah expresses the deep purchase in the metaphorical sense, the purchase of the land on the Jewish psyche. So you're going to get to start all over again, and you're going to get a a fresh opportunity, which is really quite stirring and beautiful.
Right, except for the fact that built into that system is tremendous tension, because who's going to want to sell land in the year? Who's going to want to lend money if there's going to be an amnesty? I mean, and the tradition deals with these questions
Well,
because they're
that's
inevitable
exactly
to a complicated economy.
But that's I mean, this is why this is a, now looking ahead to Deuteronomy, this is why this is a religious system. And it is a civil system, but it is also a religious one, because in Deuteronomy, when those questions come up, and it's okay, lest you become a rotten scumbag and you harden your heart and you say, Karvata shnata sheva, shnata shmita. Don't, the lotik pots et yadcha, the lotametz et levavcha, don't harden your heart, the lotik pots et yadcha me'achicha hevion, close your hand, patoch tisach et yadcha le'achicha hevion, open your hand. And that is a religious message, right? Be an open-hearted person, even when it's not going to profit you.
So
that's chashuv.
Absolutely, and therein lies, I think, the deep economic tension. When you have to open your heart, open your hands, and you say, look, I've worked for what I've worked for, and there is so this actually leads into a whole section of Parshat Behar. The notion that your brother will be dependent on you, or that there will be people in your midst who will need your aid. So maybe the question is, what kind of society does the Torah envision, and what is your place in that society? What's the social contract here, Barry? What do you?
The social contract, I think, as we look at Vayikra as a whole, is to establish a holy community. But it's not a holy community that's predicated on withdrawing into ourselves. It's one that's forcing us to turn out. That holiness is not always something that's neat and pleasant, shall we say, but can be a coarseness to it and a problematic structure that goes with it that we have to attend to. In real life, people become impoverished and the community has to take care of them. When a person can no longer take care of him or herself, we don't say goodbye, God bless. We say we have to do something for you. And I think the call, as you said, the tension is that we want to be holy. We want to live in God's image. We have to recognize that this is all God's world and we have to make it better.
This is really so illuminating to the general social ethic of Judaism. Okay, it is not in the end an individualistic one. It is in the end a communitarian one. And I think that on a literary level, this passage here in Leviticus 25 establishes that by its use of the word achicha. Repeatedly, it describes the poor person as your brother, okay? So addressing the Israelite, it's saying, as Barry said, real life, there's economic winners and losers. People get in trouble. And so the first thing that happens is, achicha, your brother. This is your brother who is struggling. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to give him an interest-free loan. Okay, that's your first step. And that should take care of things. And it's going to cost you money to do that, because it does. This is money you can't invest. This is money that you're risking losing, but you have to, because this is your brother. We would say kinsperson, right, or brother or sister, whatever. And then that might not work, but you have to strengthen that person, because even if the person gets a little worse and they're in a little bit worse strait, and the interest-free loan didn't do it, then they're really struggling. Well, you have to strengthen that person even further and take them on as a like a Hebrew slave. Hebrew slave. This word eved ivri sounds very bad, and it is. But the eved ivri, the Hebrew servant, is a benevolence. It's not an exploitative institution, because it means that rich people, whether you want to or not, you simply have to give a job to the people who are struggling in your communities. And yes, rich person, it's going to cost you some money, but it doesn't matter, because this is what it means to be in a covenantal community.
So I want to go back to what Barry said just before. In the covenantal community, and it's structured around I think an ideal. It's not a utopian ideal. I think that what I'm struggling with here, or trying to figure out, is that, you know, kedusha is a world built on categories, order. It's, you know, what's permitted, what's forbidden, and all the things that go. I mean, you know, I spent so much time in the reading of Vayikra on this round thinking about, you know, the role of the priests, and how the sanctuary is divided into the zones, and you know, that theme is really appealing. And then, of course, you know, the messiness of life breaks into all of this. And you want to construct a utopian society, but in a utopian society, there's still going to be poverty. In other words, it's not a utopian society. It's a real society in which people are trying to live towards an ideal. And in the ideal, yeah, you're going to have, you know, people who are poor. You're going to have people who are not able to work. You're going to have people who, you know, for one reason or another, are not capable, you know, and are capable at some skills and not other skills. And people who, you know, have horrible things happen to them as life inevitably, you know, deals us. And because of loss, or because of injury, or because of something, they're set back. Look at what we're in. I mean, and think about the messiness of life, you know, and all of this. You know, we've had just this kind of, you know, crisis week in the Jewish world with the Lag BaOmer festivities on Mount Meron, and 45 Jews, you know, trampled to death. I mean, that's, you know, horrendous, horrific kind of scene where just the awfulness and messiness of life imposes itself on joy. I don't know.
So what I wanted to say is that Vayikra, in a certain sense, prefigures the Constitution, because it wants to make a more perfect union. We're not going to get there to the perfect union, but we can make things better. And our charge, it seems to me, as Jews, and we could give a shout out to the inscription on the Liberty Bell, which will proclaim freedom throughout the land to all the inhabitants thereof, is that we want to work to create a community where we can draw God's presence into the world. We want to create a world where God would want to dwell. And if we could do that, then God will dwell amongst us with all of our imperfections.
I think that's, you know, the theme that the book of Vayikra will end with. Of course, it's the blessings and curses. It's the idea that there are consequences of the covenant. But Behokotai telechu, in the second of our two parshas, which we only have a couple of minutes for, but that's, you know, we'll only deal with what will happen if you do. V'natati gishmechem beitam. I'll make the natural order work properly. V'natati shalom ba'aretz. You'll have peace in the land. There is a contiguity to the law, to the order, to trying to create this perfect union and peace. How do you read it, Jeremy? How do you?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, it is not, you know, the back in Behar, you know, we know we leave Avdut to Pharaoh, you know, Avadim haynu leFaro b'Mitzrayim, but the point of leaving Pharaoh's servitude is not to not be servants to anybody, it's to be servants to God. Because Behar will close off, Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim avadayim. Okay, you used to be an Eved to Pharaoh, now you are my avadim, and it doesn't mean that you know, I'm now going to mistreat you in the same way. It means that you have a real freedom because you are integrated into the way things ought to be. You are integrated into an ethical and sacred community. And by the way, if you live in accordance with that, you will live in a good world. I thought Barry's phrase was quite eloquent. You know, if you make the world one that God would want to live in, then you go, lo and behold, you discover that the divine is present. And you know, we're not going to talk about the terrible stuff that is described. That the Torah kind of like goes off the chain when it describes what will happen if you violate the covenant, and it'll be disgraceful and terrible and terrifying. We're fortunately not going to go into that today, but you know, it bears thinking about, because not that in my religious life I think that an angry and vengeful God is going to punish us for failing to keep the mitzvot, but it is possible that you, unlike, you know, living in the good world of social ethics and care and sanctity, you live in a bad world of exploitation and desecration. And then you're going to have to live in a world of terrible suffering, of terrible fear, where the sound of a driven leaf makes you run away, and you're starving because you have screwed this world up massively. So I hope that the Tochacha is not like primarily about, ooh, look how terrible God is, but at least some reckoning with how badly one can screw up what ought to be an otherwise good world.
Barry, have any closing thoughts on the book of Leviticus, Vayikra, or anything?
Yeah, I am struck by what you said a number of times, Elliot, about how there's a story behind the law.
Yeah.
And the law presents itself as static. It doesn't seem to move, and the story has movement. And one of the things that strikes me is that life is all about movement, that sometimes things are static, but most of the time we're either going to or leaving from a place. And it's a call to remind us that even though there are moments of stasis, Shabbat in the sense, the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, that we need to concentrate as much on our movement during the week, during the 6 years, during the 49 years, in order to infuse our lives with meaning.
Jeremy, what parting shots on Leviticus, Vayikra? Anything that stays with you on this round? Anything about anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's very vivid to me is that the title of Torah HaKohanim is a distortion, right? There's a lot of stuff that is about the priestly behaviors, but ultimately it is about the holy community in the ways that we just said of social care and v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving your neighbor as yourself. Lo tisnat achicha, don't hate your brother, but take care of your brother. What do you think?
I think I'm still back at suet and fat. I can't get that picture out of my head. The animal cut up into pieces. It represents, I don't know.
So the Torah Kohanim, I think, Jeremy, is not about priests as a class of people, but it's about a Mamlechet Kohanim. It's that we are all Kohanim, and that's what is supposed to grab us.
I think that these ideas are really very profound. I think this book it's situated at the center of the Torah for a reason. It elicits from us all of these different ideas. It does bring us closer to this, to the central principles of the Torah, kadoshim to you. I think it also uncovers for us that when you look under the verse, there's a story there. I love that idea that each one of these situations, these laws, reflects a human drama and people, and we're still living in that, and that gives us tremendous joy. That's why what we do is so joyful to the three of us, because I think we're trying to uncover the great human drama here, and just what it means to be a human being. It's what it means to live with these rules, with the law, with God, with the people, and how joyful it is, how often messy it is, how difficult it is, but it's so rewarding, so beautiful. And with that, we got to thank our listeners, our viewers, including many people, new viewers from all over the world, including Canada and Israel. And we have Yom Yerushalayim coming up, and lots of good things. We hope everyone has a wonderful, beautiful Shabbat. And we'll see you next week on another edition of HAZAK HAZAK VENITHAZEK.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye-bye.